Hi guys, this is Mr. Tan, and today we are looking at business research. So we're going to be taking the register, putting that online. Today we're looking at quantitative research methods, and just thinking about it, what do you think quantitative research methods are? So just thinking about this by yourselves, just see what you think, comes into your mind when you think about quantitative research methods. Well, quantitative research is a systematic scientific investigation of data and their relationships. When we look at the quantitative research framework, we can see that you have the problem, and then below that you kind of like have the hypothesis and experiment. It can be an experimental group or a controlled group, which leads on to results, which can then give you a consistent with the hypothesis that you're trying to prove or disprove, or inconsistent with the hypothesis. And this can either theory can be supported or theory can be unsupported. And then you go back up to the top of the model in terms of the problem, in terms of revising the theory or supporting the theory. So kind of like a quantitative research framework, hypothesis, experiment, results, proving or disproving the hypothesis or the question you're trying to actually determine. Overview of quantitative research. Well, quantitative research, the objective of quantitative research is to develop and employ mathematical models and theories and hypotheses pertaining to natural phenomena. Measuring is key to quantitative research because it shows the relationship between data and observation. So you're trying to get some statistical information so you can make some inferences about that information that you've obtained. Correlation research. Define if the data has an observable relationship that can be further specified in terms of magnitude and or an increase or decrease. So the correlation, the degree of correlation between two or more variables. So if there's a positive correlation between two or more variables, that shows that one variable may affect another. And if there's a negative correlation, then maybe not. I mean, just to give you an example, if you're looking at gold prices, for instance, and you're trying to ascertain, whether you should, if you wanted to buy gold on the stock market, well, then one variable is the link between the US dollar. You see, the more the US dollar goes down in relation to other currencies, it means that people have less confidence at that time in the dollar, so they're investing their money either into other currencies or into gold, and vice versa. So the stronger the dollar is, the more of an impact it will have, either positively or negatively, on gold. So there's definitely a direct correlation between the strength of the dollar and whether or not the prices of gold go up and down. Common types of designs used in the quantitative research include cross-sectional, longitudinal, experimental, meta-analysis, survey, case study, and quasi-experimental. So looking at the cross-sectional research, this measures variables at one point in time. Data is usually collected via validated questionnaires and objective measures. So the relationship between perceived adult attachment styles, personality, and parental bonding, for example. Cross-sectional research, measuring variables at one point or another. Longitudinal research, examining change in variables over time. Data is collected on more than one occasion. Do self-efficiency expectations at the beginning of a statistic module predict end-of-term exam performance? Do perceptions of male body image change from adolescent to young adulthood? So again, looking at the variables changing over a period of time with that same kind of key person that you're actually looking at in this instance. Experimental research. The point of an experiment is to isolate the cause and effect, and there are three criteria. This includes There is random allocation of participants to groups or conditions. There is use of an independent variable, IV. There is use of a dependent variable, DV. So, experimental research, cause and effect. Again, adding to experimental research, compare two or more groups that are similar, except for one factor or variable. Statistical analysis of data. Conditions are, highly controlled. Variables are manipulated by the research. The effects of, the influence of, experimental research. Survey research, use set of predetermined questions. Collect answers from representative samples, answers to categorize and analyze so that tendencies can be discerned. And here we're trying to determine, and we're linking the questionnaire to probably your literature review, and then your literature review in terms of your question that you want determined, or your hypothesis to prove or disprove. And so this data will either guide you one way or another in terms of giving you that information to determine your conclusions and recommendations. Meta-analysis. Numerous experimental studies with reported statistical analysis are compared. Distinguishes trends. Affects size. The influence of the independent variable on a dependent variable can be compared. On the the independent variable on a dependent variable. So you can compare these, the effect of size. Case study, also called single case design, described numerically, a specific case, can be a group or individual, may test or generate hypotheses. Results often presented with tables and graphs. Independent variable, the variable that is controlled or manipulated by the researcher, the variable that is thought to have some effect upon a dependent variable. The one difference between the treatment, experimental and control groups. Dependent variable, that which is measured, the outcome, that which is influenced or affected by the independent variable. So we're looking at a specific variable and we're saying what will actually influence that variable, what are the different factors. So if we look at the different research methods, we can see that you can have qualitative and quantitative, and it's very important to bear in mind quantitative data. You got different ways in terms of content analysis that we've looked at, experiments, use of secondary data from official statistics like the government census. You've got quantitative data from surveys, which can be questionnaires, structured or interviewed. But quantitative data is predominantly trying to find out statistical information for a specific purpose or with a specific aim and objective. And what you're trying to do is to clearly define who the population is in the using quantitative data. So you're defining the population at hand, and then you are trying to derive some statistical inferences from taking a sample from the total universe. And it's the taking of that small sample, which is large enough and done in such a way where it's unbiased, or you reduce the amount of bias within your processes, so that the data and the information and the inferences you make from that sample size is representative of the total population at hand. And then on the other side of the coin, you have the qualitative data, which is not representative of the total population. And again, you can still use qualitative data in terms of use of secondary data, qualitative data in terms of case studies, informal interviews, observations, and observations can be split into non-participant and participant. So participant in terms of overt and covert, and non-participant in terms of overt and covert. But focusing on the quantitative side, again, it's really, please bear in mind that yes, there are different methods and different ways of doing it, and I'm sure that most of you have already done surveys and questionnaires design and provided your hypothesis or question, done a literature review, and then looked at the research methodology. And most of you have done surveys, either structured or unstructured interviews and questionnaires. But from a small sample size of the total population defined, and then you're making inferences about the total population. So instruments for collecting quantitative data, questionnaires. So questionnaires, you can have open-ended questions or closed-ended questions. Other sources of secondary quantitative data, databases, FAME, Bloomberg, Morningstar Intelligence, annual reports, and so on and so forth. Reliability, the ability of a measurement tool to yield consistent results over time under similar conditions. Reliability. One could question how reliable were the statistical information when the polling was done in the US as regards to the Republicans and Donald Trump. And one time the polls, various polls, were saying that Biden had over a 12-point lead, and yet we see in the presidential elections and the electoral colleges in the US, a record number of people voted for Donald Trump. I think 72 million, but even more people voted for Joe Biden, giving him, I think, almost 306 electoral college votes is predicted to have. So again, how consistent are these results over time under similar conditions? Content validity, the extent to which the items on a testing tool that are being used to measure the dependent variable reflect all of the facets being studied. Criterion-related validity, also called predictive validity, the extent to which a testing tool uses data that allow the researcher to make accurate predictions about a dependent variable. Construct validity, the extent to which the testing tool measures what it is supposed to measure. The relationship between the item in a tool and a dependent variable, and also relates to the physical construction of a written tool, Dean's survey, and how this impacts the accuracy of the results. Internal validity relates to the internal aspects of the study and their effect on the outcome, such as the researcher planning and preparation, judgment, and control for potential, confounding variables. External validity relates to the extent to which findings can be generalized beyond the actual study participants. And how valid are these results for a different group of people, a different setting, or other conditions of testing? So what are the advantages of quantitative research? So, I'm sure you should know by now, but clear interpretations, as long as the research has been carried out in a methodological way and where you reduce the bias all the way through your research, makes sense of the, organized perceptions, careful scrutiny, logical, sequential, and controlled, reduce researcher bias, hopefully, results may be understood by individuals in other disciplines. Disadvantages of quantitative research, cannot assist in understanding issues in which basic variables have not been identified or clarified. If that's not in your research, so it's not going to form part of your research. Complex issues like the emotional response, personal values, cannot always be reduced to numbers. Absolutely. If you look at Coke, when Diet Coke was launched, it's supposed to be targeted at men and women, but a huge percentage of women were buying it than men, and you're not going to find statistical information to find out why. But really, you need to use qualitative data to find out the reasons why. And the sampling, as we discussed earlier, you define your total population, and then within your total population, you must also make sure that you follow the right methodologies to take your sampling. What type of sampling methodology are you going to adopt? Because depending upon the type, that will reduce the amount of bias that you incorporate within your survey. So again, very, very important. Your sample size must be large enough and done in a way which is unbiased to be representative of the views, so that inferences can be made from the total population. Sampling methods, random. All members of N are equal, have an equal chance of being selected. Stage, random selection of a group. Then take sample, cluster samples. select a natural group to sample from, like the community. So sampling methods, stratified, you have a stratified random sample, identify the strata and sample accordingly. Okay, systematic random sample every 4 person, but starting at a random point. Opportunity, sample a convenient group. So quantitative versus qualitative. So quantitative research strategy, investigation aims to assess pre-stated theory, deductive reasoning. Remember we talked about deductive and inductive. Often involves hypothesis testing. Attempts to minimize the influence of the researcher on the outcome. Quantitative data infers statistics from a small population. Taking the sample from the population, so you make inferences from the data that you receive from that sample size. Data collection therefore requires closed responses. And in comparison to qualitative research strategy, investigation aims to create a novel theory, inductive reasoning, so it's more inductive. Research becomes inherent part of the study. Qualitative data, infers complex statements or opinions. Data collection therefore permits open responses. So in conclusion, we can see that we've reviewed briefly the quantitative research methods, the sample size, sampling methods, and reliability and validity. So thank you today from Mr. Tan.